Tonight, closing in. Israel zeroes in on a top Hamas leader, even as Palestinians in Gaza are left with increasingly smaller areas to flee, and as new evidence of sexual violence committed by the terror group on October 7th surfaces. Plus,
it looks for guns that are exposed.
Artificial intelligence and the fight to prevent American mass shootings. And the elephant not in the room.
All three of them have been licking Donald Trump's boots for years.
The debate breakdown after another Trump no-show. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Israel takes out several terror leaders in the war against Hamas. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And from our studio in Washington, I'm Jenna Browder. Israel surrounding the home of a top Hamas leader, with thousands of Palestinians forced into overcrowded camps as fighting intensifies.
The Israel Defense Forces say the mastermind behind the October 7th terror attacks is hiding underground.
Terrorists are now emerging from underground and are fighting against our forces in face-to-face combat. Our forces are winning and have the upper hand.
The released hostages and families of those still in captivity met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu Wednesday. The victims testifying that they endured sexual abuse at the hands of Hamas on October 7th and while in captivity. Doctors also verified the free hostages were drugged prior to their release to make them appear happy. Israel pressing the United Nations to investigate charges of sexual violence by Hamas fighters after this week's extremely graphic eyewitness testimonies at the United Nations alleging sexual violence and rape carried out by Hamas.
Well, back here at home, several top American universities are under investigation for allowing their campuses to become hotbeds for anti-Semitism and bigotry.
That's right. Some Jewish students are now suing their respective colleges, saying their safety is at risk. CBN's Brody Carter reports.
The Jewish population in New York City is roughly 10%. At Columbia University, they're in the top 15 of private universities by Jewish population. And Jewish students that we've talked to at CBN, they tell us they simply don't feel safe here. One freshman even filing a lawsuit against the university for failing to protect her against anti-Semitism.
I choose to be hopeful that nobody would attack me physically, but do I feel emotionally safe? Do I feel welcomed? Not in the slightest.
Daniela is a 21-year-old freshman at Columbia University. Before her studies, she served in the Israeli Defense Forces as part of the Search and Rescue Brigade. After October 7th and subsequent war, anti-Israel protests flooded the university. Daniela even received death threats on the anonymous social platform SideChat. She's now suing the university for allowing anti-Semitism to thrive.
I'm asking for the administration to step in and ensure that anti-Semitism cannot run free on my college campus. And I think that's the minimum.
We're talking not just about verbal harassment, anti-Jewish epithets being hurled at Jewish students as they walk to class, for example, but we're also talking about acts of physical violence.
Mark Ressler, partner at Kasowitz, Benson & Torres, is representing Daniela. He's also suing NYU on behalf of 3 other Jewish students, alleging civil rights violations for its anti-Semitic educational environment.
The schools we're looking at are viewed as among the most elite universities in the country. We're talking about Columbia, Harvard, MIT. The fact that these institutions of higher learning have permitted their campuses to become hotbeds of bigotry is a very sad fact.
Plaintiffs are asking universities to follow their federal obligations, specifically under Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which protects Jewish students from hatred and bigotry. In an email, Columbia acknowledged the lawsuit and the Department of Education's investigation of 7 colleges of reported incidents of anti-Semitism.
Posters of Israeli hostages have been spread throughout New York City streets. Many have been defaced, even torn down. Now Jewish community leaders are calling it for what it is.
This is terrorism. This terrorism. You have to realize that you can. It is so dangerous to ever say that murder of innocent civilians as a strategy not as an unfortunate byproduct of war, as a strategy to seek out children and women and to kill them horrifically. If that is your strategy, your response to the oppression, that is a moral response that can, a caliber of immorality that can never be sanctioned.
Rabbi Dov Yanakorn leads a Jewish community of more than 1,300 students and young professionals at Chabad House Bowery near NYU. He says the spike of assaults, vandalism, and harassment against Jews have led to a 30% increase of young Jewish students leaning into their faith.
Right, this is horrific, but thank God the Jewish people react well under fire, and this has caused such an explosion of Jewish life and Jewish community and Jewish optimism and Jewish faith and Jewish practice.
The rabbi says recent events, however, have parents reconsidering sending their kids to NYU and other universities in question.
These problems are coming from the top down. This is not... These are educational institutions that come with a bias and agenda.
Educational consultant Jennifer Brozo says the failure of certain universities to stand against anti-Semitism is having a negative impact on early school choice.
Unfortunately, it's a little bit too late, and a lot of students have just, these schools are off their list, and they're going to other schools.
Whether these investigations and lawsuits tarnish the Ivy League reputation is yet to be seen. Now Jewish leaders encourage allies and partners with the Jewish community to stand against anti-Semitism as the fight makes its way to our nation's capital. Reporting in New York City, Brody Carter, CBN News.
Thank you, Brody. Well, at least 3 people, including the suspected shooter, are dead tonight after America's latest mass shooting. Wednesday's shooting on the campus of the University of Las Vegas in Nevada was allegedly committed by a former college professor. The killings following a shooting spree Tuesday by a former U.S. Army officer who killed his parents before shooting and killing 4 more people in Texas. All this as Democratic lawmakers on Capitol Hill today remembered a grim anniversary when 20 children and 6 adults fell victim to a gun massacre in Newtown, Connecticut.
We don't have a choice. This is a moral imperative, not just a political obligation. It is a moral duty for this country to stop gun violence.
All of the children shot and killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School on December 14, 2012, were between 6 and 7 years old. Well, sadly, mass shootings in America are nothing new.
That's why a company co-founded by former U.S. Navy SEALs is using artificial intelligence to protect venues like places of worship and schools from violence. CBN's Billy Hallowell has the story.
As concern grows over mass shootings, Zero Eyes co-founder Rob Huberty says his company is using artificial intelligence to protect potential targets like schools and houses of worship.
So what we do is we take your existing video cameras, that's what we need to use, and we process every frame by frame, every image, every video feed that you have that are your cameras, we don't install anything. And we use our AI that goes over them, and what it does is it looks for guns that are exposed.
Within seconds, Zero Eyes pinpoints the types of guns being brandished and alerts first responders about the nature of potential threats, as well as the types of weapons assailants might have. Dominic Iacco at Lansing Catholic High School in Michigan says this can offer peace of mind to his school community.
My initial reaction was basically, how can we not do this? When you look at kind of the tragic history of these types of scenarios and you see the advantage of the response time that Zero Eyes gives you, as an administrator of a school, obviously you never want something like this to ever happen, but you also want to know that you've done everything possible to make the school as safe as possible.
Matt Montana, safety director at Valley Baptist Church in Bakersfield, California, agrees.
People want to do us harm. And when I say us, I mean men and women of the Christian faith. Not only the faith-based communities. For whatever reasons, because we live in a broken world, there's a lot of sin out there, and the innocence is preyed upon.
His church is preparing to roll out Zero Eyes, and Montana, who worked for years in law enforcement, says the real-time intelligence can help mitigate threats and save lives.
What we're doing here, that in itself may deter somebody who has thoughts of doing harm to people at Valley Baptist Church.
While Huberty is fully aware of privacy concerns regarding AI, He says his company has intentional safeguards in place.
We view ourselves not as the total solution, but as a layer that makes sense. There's no predictive analytics. We're just looking for an object, which is a gun. We're just trying to be the best in the world at seeing guns and trying to give that information to first responders and those who can do something about it first.
With mass shootings and acts of violence increasingly directed at synagogues, churches, and faith-based schools, Zero Eyes is offering a viable option for leaders looking to increase protections. Billy Hollowell, CBN News.
The alliance between Donald Trump and conservative Christians is the focus of a new book called The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory. Author Tim Alberta has written extensively and critically about Trump's relationship with evangelicals, but this new book gets personal about Alberta's own evangelical background and what he describes as the extremism he encountered when his father, an evangelical pastor, died in 2019.
We buried my father, came home from the cemetery, and I was handed a note by a friend, a church friend who was there helping to prepare a meal, and his note said that I should be ashamed of myself, that I was a part of the deep state, that I was working to undermine God's ordained leader of this country, Donald Trump, and but that I could be restored, that if I would use my journalism skills to investigate the deep state and to exonerate Donald Trump, that I would be forgiven in the eyes of God. And for me in that moment, it had just become clear that this was no longer an abstract problem, that this was a real urgent problem, and I felt the Lord nudging me to do something about it.
And we'll dig deeper into Alberta's faith and the reaction to the book that has been coming out soon.
All right, and with that, let's bring in Nathan Gonzalez, editor and publisher of Inside Elections and a Faith Nation contributor. Nathan, great to have you with us this evening. Let's start with that Tim Alberta interview that John did. So you just heard behavior that would be very hard to characterize as Christian. Your reaction to what you heard from Tim?
Well, sadly, it's probably not the only time that's happened to Tim, and the person who said those things or wrote those things probably not alone in feeling that. And so, I think that there is it'll be a fascinating book to read, because I think it's a unique voice, Tim, being a unique voice into evangelicals and evangelicals wrestling with politics and what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be a part of a church. It's a real issue that still needs to be explored.
Well, Nathan, to the GOP debate last night, were there any winners or losers in your opinion?
Maybe the people who didn't watch all 2 hours of that. I don't know.
The winners?
It feels like we're kind of going through the motions here because Trump isn't on the stage. It feels like this is a microcosm of the whole race, where you had candidates focusing on a candidate who's in third place, maybe surging into second place, but still a distant second behind the front runner. And I look at it through the lens of if you are a Trump supporter and you watch that, was it really a reason to not support President Trump anymore? Probably not. You're probably still thinking the same thing.
Yeah. Well, that was my question for you next, Nathan. We were watching the debate last night, and in the back of my mind was, does any of this really matter if they're just running for second place? What is the value of this second place spot?
I think the value is if Trump stumbles or if there's some significant event that his support collapses. But when you look at the polls, Trump is the clear front runner, both nationally and in the early states. And I tend to believe the polls. And remember, for the last 7 years, we have all been conditioned to believe the polls are underestimating Trump, right? They underestimate his support. So now to believe that he's not going to win Iowa or not going to win the nomination, we have to believe that now the polls are overestimating Trump. Now, that's possible, but that's a 180 shift from everything we have learned over the last 7 years when Trump is involved in these elections.
Finally, Nikki Haley is on the heels of Ron DeSantis. We saw her taking a lot of incoming last night. She's leading DeSantis, though, in New Hampshire and South Carolina, not the case in Iowa. Nathan, if she wins in Iowa, though, is it all but over for Ron DeSantis?
If she wins in Iowa, that would be huge because she would be ahead of Trump. If she's in second place ahead of DeSantis, that would be huge, too. I think there is more pressure on Governor DeSantis because he has invested so much time, energy, money, attention on Iowa that he needs to finish in at least second place. If he's third, I don't think he
he moves on. If Nikki Haley finishes third, I think she can still press on further into the calendar. And then New Hampshire is going to be tough for DeSantis.
Yeah. All right, Nathan Gonzalez of Inside Elections. Nathan, good to see you as always. Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan.
Good to see you both.
Coming up, from anti-Semitism to foreign influence, more on the American university system next.
Well, welcome back. With the rise of anti-Semitic incidents at universities around the country, some question whether foreign money pouring in at universities is influencing what students are being taught on campus.
Members of Congress would like to know, at the very least, where the money is coming from. CBN's Matt Galka sat down with the sponsor of the Deterrent Act, a bill that would put greater scrutiny on universities to show where they're getting their funding from.
California Congresswoman Michelle Steele says universities are not following the rules when it comes to disclosing major gifts from foreign entities.
There's already law that when you receive over $250,000 from foreign entities, you're supposed to do it, but 70% of universities never complied that.
A major concern of Steele and others is why the money is coming from a country possibly at odds with the United States.
UC Berkeley received over $240 million from China. And guess what they did? They brought Chinese officials and Chinese researchers and showed their sensitive research center. And it's not acceptable.
Steele's Deterrent Act would require stricter reporting requirements when it comes to the foreign money, lowering the threshold from $250,000 to $50,000. And universities would have to report any dollar amount from Iran, China, Russia, and North Korea. The rise of anti-Semitism on campus also worries Steele and her colleagues. Steele questioned prominent university presidents about foreign influence this week.
One thing that their philanthropy does not do is influence how we run the university, how we enforce our policies, or how we keep our students safe.
Steele ties these foreign donations to the old adage, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
I'm not buying it. They said they are not influenced. Our students never, get those propaganda, and our students are not influenced by those money. But you know what? It's a joke.
The Deterrent Act passed the House with bipartisan support this week and now heads to the Senate. And Steele hopes there's momentum to get something done before year's end. Matt Galka, CBN News.
Thank you, Matt. Coming up, the celebration of Hanukkah begins with a beacon of hope and light.
Finally tonight, the Jewish Festival of Lights is beginning.
Hanukkah celebrates the rededication of the temple in Jerusalem, and the world's largest menorah is up just in time for the first candle lighting. This menorah near New York City's Central Park stands at 36 feet tall. The nightly candle lighting ceremony during the 8-day holiday usually draws huge crowds. And right here in Washington, D.C., the National Hanukkah Menorah is on display just across the street from the White House. The annual event tonight includes musical guests and a lighting ceremony of the National Menorah.
Yeah, it's just beautiful to see. Our Jewish friends have been through a lot in the last 2 months, so to see this outward show of support is really nice.
A time of celebration in the middle of just a lot of chaos.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that's going to do it for Faith Nation.
Thanks for watching. We hope to see you right back here tomorrow.